Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to look at a bit of soft tailoring. So what I mean when I say soft tailoring is something that's not so structured. I've made a jacket for my partner. He was going to a big awards event and he needed something that was, I believe they were describing it as street casual, but the translation from French Canadian basically means something that looked a bit more chic. So we went with a cropped, soft tailored, smart jacket, basically. And I thought I'd take you along for the making process. This isn't going to be a fully fledged step-by-step instruction on how to make a jacket. This is more looking at the processes that I use and that I was thinking was most appropriate at the time of making. And I thought it might be quite interesting if you're looking at a bit of tailoring or getting started in tailoring. Like I said, this is a very simplistic way of tailoring a jacket. It's not adding too much shape into the form of the jacket itself. It's more about creating a layer that sits nicely over the body. So there is a bit of shoulder padding just down here, but not shoulder pads, just like a pad of fabric over this part to help shape over this quite hollow part of the body, which when you drape it in fabric tends to look a bit strange. So I added that piece just to help give the jacket a little bit of structure and so it sit nicely over my partner's frame. So the next series of shots you're going to see is how I made this jacket. Like I said, it's not a full step-by-step instruction. I wanted to give you a bit of a sense of how simple tailoring can be. Tailoring isn't as scary as it always looks. Obviously, if you are making a full tailored jacket, there's a lot more processes involved and it's a bit more time consuming, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not achievable. You can absolutely make a tailored jacket, and maybe trying something like this with a bit more soft tailoring would give you that step towards finally making a fully tailored jacket. And you never know, we might do a bit of full tailoring on this channel in the future. If you'd like to see that, let me know. So without further ado, let's see how we made this jacket. So we begin with laying down our backing fabric and stitching it to the top fabric, and this is called flat tacking. So layering a backing piece of fabric that will support the top layer. This isn't always the case in very tailored jackets. You would use a canvas instead, but because this is a soft tailoring, like I said, I'm using a calico or 100% bleached cotton as a backing, which then I am pinning to the top fabric, or some people call it the fashion fabric, so the fabric that you see. And this then gives us the support that we need to create the jacket itself. To secure these layers, I'm using a very small stitch that goes through to the front of the fabric, so to the top fabric that you see, the actual green of this jacket, and a larger stitch behind. So I'm skipping a larger area at the back of the fabric on the backing fabric itself and going through just a small amount to the top fabric. I did a little cross stitch in the corner, and this is achieved by just sort of turning my fabric so it's facing away from me rather than towards me, and stitching in the opposite way, which gives me a little anchoring corner cross stitch. The next thing I'm doing is I'm doing the opposite with the lines that I want to show through to the front, which are my tacking lines. And this one in particular is my center front line, and I want to be able to see that when I'm trying it on my partner and using it as reference for attaching my zip, etc. So I'm using a bigger stitch on the front that's visible and a smaller stitch in behind. This will then be removed when the jacket is finished. I'm also tacking through my pocket lines, and at the end I'm going to do a little bar stitch, or a little stitch that demonstrates the end of my line when it's going through to the front of the fabric, so I can see what my lines are from the top, or the visible part, the outside part of the jacket. And then I'm going to add a very thin layer of padding, so this is a piece of tailoring padding, to the top shoulder chest area of the front pieces. I'm not applying this to the back, this is just to the front because it achieves that smooth shape over the hollow part of your chest, like I said at the beginning. This is then secured with a herringbone stitch around the edges. If you're doing a very tailored jacket, you would often use either a silk strip or a piece of interfacing cut in a strip. That's a very theatrical way of doing things if you're attaching a interfaced strip around the edge. But if you're doing, say, more Savile Row tailoring, then you would use a silk strip. In this case, I'm just securing it to my backing because I have the backing piece. Here I'm applying some tailoring tacks through the center of the shoulder pieces just to help anchor them to the backing fabric nice and securely so they don't shift when the jacket's being worn. The next thing to do is to attach the belt strips to the bottom of each of the front pieces and the back pieces of the jacket. This jacket has a belt design, so it's incorporated into the design of the jacket, and I'm using pins to help me match the seam lines to make sure that I get a nice accurate finish and a nice accurate line when I'm sewing. I'm going to top stitch the belt strip down, so I'm going to remove some of the excess. This is called grading, or grading my seam allowance. To do this, I'm cutting the layer of seam allowance that's going to lay closest to the outside of the jacket, so then when my other piece of seam allowance gets folded on top of that and top stitched down, the seam is much less bulky and will lay much smoother. Here we have our pocket situation. So I drew my pocket shape onto my pattern piece and then translated that onto some calico, which I'm going to use as a backing to ensure that my pocket is nice and stable. The welts of the pocket are also backed in calico because I wanted to minimize the amount of gluing in this jacket because I want it to last a long time. I'm then giving each of the pocket pieces a layer of lining, so when you reach into the pocket there's a nice smooth surface and your hand doesn't get stuck. These layers need to be made to be one piece basically, so I'm stitching around the calico layer and the lining layer to make them one piece. Then I will use that as one side of my pocket. This is a slightly unorthodox method what I'm doing here, but I want to, like I said, minimize the amount of gluing, so I haven't put an interfacing in the pocket welt, so I've backed them, and to make sure that the backing doesn't come away from the crisp line at the edge, I'm just doing a quick tacking stitch in a green thread which won't be removed. It's there to secure the two pieces together in a place that's going to get the most strain. Once the pocket welts are nicely pressed, I'm going to offer them up to my pocket line that was marked through to the front. I've chalked 1/2 centimeter away from the tacking line on both sides of the tacking line. The pocket is going to be offered up to one side of this, which is the side closest to the hem. I'm pinning this in place, and then I'm going to stitch along another chalk line which I have chalked 1/2 centimeter away from the cut edge of my pocket welt. Once I've done that, I marry up one side of my pocket right on top of that stitch line. I'm going to stitch that pocket straight through on top of that line, and the other pocket is going to be married up to the opposite chalk line. You have to ensure that your pockets are facing away from your pocket opening. This seems kind of counterintuitive, but you've got to remember that these are going to be turned through once your pocket line is cut. So they have to be facing outwards, so then when they turn inwards, the lining of the pocket is the part that you will get access to rather than the rougher backing fabric. Once the lines have been stitched, cut through very carefully on the pocket line itself, and you want to cut up into about 2 centimeters away from the end of the pocket line, and then you're going to cut into the corners of your stitch lines and you get a sort of Y shape. Once you've cut this, you turn your pocket bags through, and then you will see that the little triangle Y shapes are loose. You have to make sure that you stitch them from the inside of the jacket. Secure them really nice and tightly so it closes off that pocket welt. So we're about halfway through the process of making this jacket now, and as you can see, the whole way through making this garment I've kept everything as flat as possible. It's really important when you're making something like a jacket, or pretty much anything really, that you keep everything as flat as possible or as shaped to the body as it should be. So if something is supposed to be curved, you keep it curved. As it is, this is, like I said, a simple box tailored jacket, so I've kept everything flat, And when I'm making the pockets, when I've been doing all of the hand stitching inside, everything has been flat to the table as much as possible.
The next stage is to cut and stitch together your lining, then lay that on top of your jacket so the wrong sides are facing each other, and then tack that through the center and around the armholes. Now I am folding back my center front line, pinning that down, and I'm going to herringbone that edge in place. I'm just making sure that when I'm stitching just the backing of the pocket, and I'm not stitching right the way through because I want to be able to use the pocket. I need my partner to be able to put his hand into the pocket, so I can't stitch it closed. I'm just making sure that I'm catching the very backing fabric, that calico piece, so it secures the front line down without restricting any access. Then it's time, once both of the front edges have been herringboned back, to apply the zip. And I'm going to just top stitch this zip in place, but I need to make sure that it stays nice and flat through the whole process, so each side marries up when it's closed. To achieve this, I'm pinning one side of the zip first, and I'm going to keep it as flat as possible through the whole pinning process. Then I will pin the other side of the zip and make sure that when I pin it, each pin is corresponding to the pin on the opposite side of the zip. This makes sure that there's no moving when the zip is applied. Once the zip is in place and everything is nicely tacked down, I've tacked my hem up as well. I'm giving everything a good press to make sure that everything lays nice and flat and there's no bulk. I'm doing as much as possible to reduce bulk to make sure that the jacket sits nicely against the body and doesn't do anything strange and start buckling anywhere. Then I'm going to finish off the hemline of the lining by marrying it up to the bottom edge, sitting it back slightly from the very bottom hem and pinning it in place. Then do exactly the same with the front edge up against the zip, making sure that you're covering any of the top stitching so you get a nice crisp line without any stitching underneath showing through. At the bottom corner, I want to make sure that I'm getting a nice folded corner and there's no extra bulk. And when I'm stitching my hem later, you'll see that I want to lift a bit of my hem as I sew it. So I'm going to make sure that the extra fabric underneath not only lays flat, but is slightly turned back up towards the body, so it's not going to get in the way of any stitching I do in a moment. To stitch everything down, I'm just doing a simple slip stitch, so passing my needle through the under layer of fabric, coming through to the lining layer which is sitting on top, and repeating that process the whole way through. Now when it comes to the hem, I want to fold back my lining by about ½ centimeter, but keep the seam allowance where it was. And as you can see, this sort of gives you a bit of extra fabric. Then I will stitch this down. Once it's stitched, I can fold it back on itself, and this gives me a little, almost like a little lip. And that means that when you're wearing the jacket, you've got a bit of extra room in the lining and not everything is so tight. The lining should be able to move a bit with the body, and this little tiny bit of extra give really makes a big difference to the fit of a jacket, and it stops anything on the outside, the actual jacket itself, from being pulled up or riding up in any way. Once the jacket is all lined, I can then stitch my shoulders shut. I'm going to do the same process as I did with the belt, and that is trimming away some of the extra seam allowance on one side, turning the other one over the top, and then I'm going to, from the right side, top stitch that seam to finish it off. Then I am laying the front part of my lining flat over the top of that seam, pulling the lining from the back over the front piece. I'm going to tuck and fold the back piece of lining up and stitch this shut. Here I'm just pinning everything in place to make sure everything's nice and flat and sitting where it needs to sit before I turn the seam allowance under and stitch it. And here we have a nice finished jacket, bar the sleeves and the collar. And then it's time for my sleeves. My sleeves in this jacket are very simplistic. It's just a one-piece sleeve that I've cut out and I've tacked in place. And now I'm going to stitch into the jacket. When I'm stitching in a sleeve, I will always stitch one line of stitching first, and then I repeat the process 1/2 centimeter into my seam allowance. That gives me 2 lines of stitching, which then I will trim away the seam allowance to that point under the underarm. This gives me a nice secure sleeve and it minimizes all of the bulk under the underarm. I didn't get footage, annoyingly, of the collar going onto the jacket, but you'll see in the final results that it's just a very simple collar and it just gets attached around the neck and the lining gets turned in the same sort of way to finish the inside of the neckline. Now it's time to finish off the sleeves. So before I can put my sleeve lining in, I need to turn up my sleeve hem. I've done a very simple stay stitch on the line of the hem, turned up the hem allowance, and now I'm herringboning it into place. Then I'm folding my sleeve lining down where I want it to sit. I'm doing the same process I did on the hem of the jacket by turning up my sleeve lining by about ½ centimeter to give me a little bit of extra leeway in the way that my lining in the sleeve sits. Once you've secured the hem, it's time to secure the sleeve head of the lining, and to do this I have made sure that the lining sits nice and smoothly up the arm. I've turned back the seam allowance and I'm going to slip stitch this lining into place.
So with those finishing touches, we have a finished jacket, and I'm going to show you what it looks like on my partner now. I think it turned out quite well. It's a boxy jacket, and that's what we were going for. It's not overly tailored. Like I said, this is supposed to be a soft tailored jacket. But my whole goal with this piece was to make it sit well on my partner's frame. The fit of a jacket is extremely important. With any garment you make, fit is important, but with something like this, where you're trying to create a boxy shape, you can't just put a square on somebody and hope for the best. It has to be fitted to them. So I didn't film the fitting process, but fitting something, doing tiny little tweaks, and often you'll find that there's a lot of extra fabric here in this sort of area. So just by pinching that closed in your pattern really helps create a good shape on someone. And with that, we have our finished jacket. And I hope you liked it. My partner liked it. That's the main thing. And I hope you like this sort of making process sort of video. I plan to do much more of these sorts of things, and if you've got any ideas, let me know in the comments below. Also, I do have a Patreon, and if you'd like to subscribe to that, I'm going to be putting out the pattern for this jacket, and some other benefits come with subscribing each month to that platform. So if you'd like to go on to Patreon, the link is in the description box. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.